The house was quiet when Evan and Grace moved in. A charming two-story colonial they bought after years of apartment hopping, tucked in a quiet town that smelled of cut grass and old trees. It was the kind of place where the mailman waved, kids rode bikes until sunset, and nothing ever seemed out of place. That was exactly what they wanted. A reset, a fresh start after the miscarriage, after the shouting, after the silence that settled in their one bedroom like a fog. This new home, with its creaky floors and musty attic, felt like it had history, soul even. And they needed that. The guest room upstairs was always cold, though. Even in summer, Grace joked about it. Ghosts need a place too, she'd say with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But they never spent much time in there. Just boxes, old books, a dusty mirror they hadn't gotten around to removing. It wasn't until Evan's sister Emily came to visit that they bothered setting it up properly. They cleaned it out, laid fresh sheets, plugged in a nightlight. The night Emily arrived, everything seemed fine. They ate dinner, laughed like old times, shared wine until midnight, then went to bed. That's when it started. Around 2:14 a.m., Emily woke up to the sound of breathing. Not hers, not distant, right behind the wall near her headboard. She sat up, heart pounding, thinking maybe the HVAC system was acting up, but it wasn't air, it was rhythmic, wet. A human breath, slow, strained, and far too close. She pressed her ear to the wall, paralyzed. It continued. Inhale, exhale, a wheeze, and then a cough. That was no pipe. She grabbed her phone, turned on the flashlight, and scanned the room. Empty, quiet again. The next morning, Emily mentioned it casually over coffee. Evan chuckled, blamed the age of the house. Grace was quiet. She sipped her drink, eyes fixed on the hallway. That night, Emily opted to sleep on the couch, but Evan, feeling a flicker of guilt, decided to spend the night in the guest room himself to prove it was nothing. Grace didn't object. In fact, she seemed relieved. At 3:06 a.m., Evan heard it too. Would you dare press your ear to the wall after hearing? Breathing. Tell us in the comments what you think is behind it. Part 2 is coming. Evan froze in bed, eyes wide open, heart pounding in time with the quiet, shallow breathing that was seeping through the wall. It came in slow pulls, like someone was trying not to be heard but couldn't help the ragged rasp in their lungs. The sound was coming from the wall behind the headboard, north-facing, no rooms adjacent on the floor plan. Just drywall, just insulation, or so they had thought. He lay there perfectly still, too afraid to sit up, trying to convince himself it was in his head, that maybe he'd subconsciously absorbed Emily's paranoia and now his mind was inventing ghosts to entertain itself. But the breathing continued. Steady, closer now, almost syncing with his own. And then it stopped. Not faded, not shifted, stopped. Evan held his breath to listen harder, and that's when the wall knocked back. Just once. Soft, deliberate, as if someone or something knew he was listening. He bolted upright, hitting the lamp, spilling light across the small room. The wall looked normal, still, pale beige with a faint crack running diagonally like a lightning bolt frozen in plaster. He approached it slowly, placing his hand on the surface. Cold, too cold for a summer night. He gave it a tap with his knuckles. Solid, no echo. He pressed his ear against it, holding his breath. Silence, then whispering. Low, muffled. Not words, but breathy rhythms, like syllables spoken underwater. He stumbled backward, left the room, and locked the door behind him. Grace found him in the kitchen 30 minutes later, barefoot, pale, drinking straight from a wine bottle. He didn't speak, just handed her the bottle, and she didn't ask. The next day, Evan called a contractor under the pretense of insulation issues. They arrived 2 days later. Grace left for the day, claimed she needed space or sunlight or both. Evan stayed, following the contractor around the house until they reached the guest room. Funny, the contractor muttered, knocking along the wall behind the bed. This one's hollow. Evan's blood ran cold. "But that wall faces outside," he said. "That's supposed to be the edge of the house." The contractor stared at him. "No, man. There's space back there. Maybe an old crawl space or a sealed utility shaft." He pulled out a small drill to test the depth and thickness. Less than an inch in, the drill slipped forward abruptly. Too far. A cavity. "Hollow space confirmed. Want me to cut it open?" the contractor asked. Evan hesitated. Everything in his body screamed no, but his mouth said yes. The contractor cut a small square, just large enough to peer into. At first, it looked like darkness. Then the flashlight beam caught something. Fabric, a thin stained mattress wedged in the narrow gap. Beside it, empty cans, a cracked mirror, a rusted spoon. And on the wall inside, tally marks, hundreds of them. And next to those marks, a name carved into the wood. "Lucas!" Evan's voice trembled. "Someone was living in there." The contractor stepped back. "No, man. Someone's still in there." "What would you do if you found a hidden room in your house? 1. No blueprint ever showed? Comment your theory before we open it further in part 3. Evan stood frozen. The name Lucas carved into the inner wall, pulsing in his mind like it had weight, like it had been waiting for someone to see it again. The contractor leaned in, his flashlight trembling slightly, revealing more of the cramped hidden space behind the guest room wall. The mattress was stained yellow and brown with age, collapsed under its own neglect. The mirror, though cracked, still faintly reflected Evan's terrified eyes. A toothbrush, dried and brittle, lay beside a pile of wrappers and dust. The smell was faint but unmistakable, rot, mildew, and something sour, like sweat soaked into wood. "This isn't a utility space," the contractor muttered. "This is a hideout." He tried to laugh it off, but it didn't land. Evan's mind raced. Who was Lucas? How had no one known this cavity existed? And most importantly, was it still being used? The contractor suggested cutting the wall wider to inspect the whole cavity. Evan agreed reluctantly, still stuck in the horror of what they'd already uncovered. As the drywall peeled away, inch by inch, the space widened just enough for someone to crawl inside. That's when they found the second mattress. This one was cleaner, newer, and beneath it a bag, black canvas, zipped and heavy. Evan opened it without thinking, driven by dread more than curiosity. Inside were protein bars, a flashlight, and a notebook. The flashlight was still functional. The protein bars hadn't expired, and the notebook was filled with pages of erratic handwriting, some words legible, others scrawled so hard they tore the paper. "They don't see me. I live through the wall. I watch through the mirror. They're never alone." Every page repeated the same themes. "Don't move when they're awake. Breathe only when they sleep." Some entries had dates, months apart, going back nearly 5 years. Evan stepped back, bile rising in his throat. Someone had been living in their walls, watching them. Maybe still was. The contractor was pale now. "I'm done," he said quickly, packing his tools. "You need to call the cops." Evan nodded. He did. The police arrived, asked questions, roped off the room. They explored the hidden cavity with gloves and cameras and eventually brought in a cadaver dog. But the dog didn't react. Not to death, anyway. What it did do was sit completely still, facing the cracked mirror, growling low in its throat without blinking. One of the officers covered the mirror with a blanket. Another whispered that the name Lucas sounded familiar. "Back in 2009, he said, flipping through his notes, "a boy went missing 3 houses down, 13 years old. Family never found him. Name was Lucas Demers." Grace returned home that evening to find Evan still sitting in the hallway, outside the sealed guest room. She listened quietly as he told her everything. Her face didn't change until he mentioned the notebook. "What did it say exactly?" she asked. He told her. She nodded once, stood up, and walked to the attic. Evan followed her, confused. She climbed through the narrow entry, pulled out an old dusty trunk she hadn't opened in years, and retrieved a single photo. "This is Lucas," she said. "He used to live here." Evan blinked. "How do you know that?" Grace didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "Because when I was 6, I lived next door, and Lucas used to talk to me through my bedroom wall." If someone lived inside the walls of your home for years, would you ever truly feel alone? Again, share your thoughts before we crawl deeper into the truth in part 4. Evan stared at the faded photograph in Grace's hand. The boy's smile youthful but uneasy, as if even in that still image he knew something others didn't. Lucas Demers, thin, dark-haired, maybe 10 or 11, stood in front of the very same house they now called home, arms at his sides, eyes slightly off camera. "He lived here before the old couple," Grace murmured, almost to herself. "He was quiet, always alone. The neighbors said his parents were strange, barely ever seen. I used to hear him whispering to me through the walls at night. I thought it was just pretend." Evan felt like the walls were pressing in. "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" She glanced at him, eyes distant. "I forgot, or I made myself forget. This house was just a house until the breathing started." She trailed off and walked back downstairs without another word. That night, the guest room door remained closed, police tape fluttering slightly from the hallway draft. Evan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, but sleep didn't come. He kept thinking of the tally marks, the fresh protein bars, the notebook, the breathing. Around 3 a.m., something woke him. Not a sound, an instinct. He sat up. The house was still. Too still. Grace was beside him, unmoving. He crept out of bed, barefoot, and stepped into the hallway. The door to the guest room was wide open. The police had sealed it. Now the tape hung in tatters, like something had ripped straight through. The room was dark. Evan flipped the switch. Nothing. He stepped in slowly, heartbeat echoing in his ears. The drywall cut by the contractor had been torn wider, jagged at the edges like claw marks. The mirror was uncovered again, and worse, clean. Not cracked, not dusty. It reflected perfectly. He approached it, compelled by something he didn't understand. As he got closer, he noticed something even more disturbing. His reflection wasn't moving. Evan tilted his head. His reflection remained still. Then it smiled. He stumbled back, heart racing, and the reflection vanished entirely, leaving only a flat black void in the glass. Behind him, the closet door creaked open. Evan turned. No one, just a sliver of blackness inside. He approached, trembling, and pushed the door fully open. A note lay on the floor, folded, addressed to Emily. He picked it up, opened it, and read the shaky handwriting. "Tell her to stop screaming at night. It wakes me up." He nearly dropped it. Emily had left days ago. She'd never returned after that first night. He hadn't spoken to her since. He texted her instantly, no response. He tried calling, straight to voicemail. The next morning, Evan drove to her apartment 2 towns over. Her car was there, untouched. The building manager hadn't seen her. Her mail had piled up. Police were notified. A missing person report was filed, and Evan said nothing about the note. That night, he returned home to find Grace sitting in the guest room, alone, lights off. "He's still here," she said, before he could even ask. "He's in the mirror, but he's not alone anymore." Evan's mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" She looked at him, her face pale, pupils wide. There's a second voice now. It's not Lucas, it's older, angry. She stood slowly, walked to the mirror, and pressed her palm to it. I think it knows we found him. I think it wants us next." The mirror darkened under her touch, like ink bleeding through from the other side. And just for a moment, Evan swore he saw his own face again, but older, hollow, and whispering something he couldn't hear. "What would you do if your reflection tried to speak to you, but it wasn't saying your words?" Comment your theory before we return to the guest room in part 5. Evan couldn't sleep that night, not after seeing Grace touch the mirror like it was something sacred or dangerous. She hadn't said another word after claiming a second voice had joined Lucas's. She just stared at her reflection in silence, her fingertips resting on the glass until Evan pulled her away gently, wordlessly. The mirror never showed anything unusual again that night, but that was somehow worse. The stillness made it feel like something was waiting, watching, breathing. The next morning, Evan woke to an empty bed and a new noise, scraping. He followed the sound to the guest room, where he found Grace carving tally marks into the closet wall with a kitchen knife. "It has to be even," she whispered, not turning around. "They get angry if it's uneven." He pulled the knife from her hand and led her out, but she seemed dazed, like she didn't fully recognize him. She didn't fight, didn't resist. She just kept murmuring about the mirror rules and not waking them up. Evan had no idea what to do. Therapy? A priest? Burn the mirror? He opted for the least spiritual route. He ripped the mirror from the wall and smashed it in the backyard with a sledgehammer. 7 pieces, like some dark omen, scattered across the grass. Grace stood by the sliding door, watching but expressionless. That night, Evan felt a glimmer of relief. The guest room stayed quiet. The walls didn't breathe. He even laughed again for a few minutes. But when he checked his phone before bed, he found a new photo in his gallery. He hadn't taken it. It was a picture of him, sleeping from above, like it had been taken from the ceiling. He ran into the guest room, heart pounding. The mirror was gone, but the wall where it had hung was no longer smooth. There was now a hatch, square, wooden, and recently sealed with nails. He hadn't seen it before. He hadn't touched that part of the wall. He ripped the nails out with the claw end of the hammer and opened the hatch slowly, half expecting a rat to leap out. But inside was nothing, just a black tunnel of drywall and dust, narrow but crawlable. He shined a flashlight in, but it only revealed darkness that seemed too deep, too deliberate. Then a breath echoed back at him, not his, not Grace's, a third presence. The sound of movement followed, someone or something shifting just beyond view. Evan slammed the hatch shut, nailed it closed again, and moved a dresser in front of it. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, Grace was worse. She didn't speak at all, just watched the empty mirror frame on the floor, as if waiting for it to reassemble itself. And later that afternoon, Evan discovered a new note in the mailbox. No postage, just folded and left inside. It read, "You're not being quiet enough." No name, no address, just that sentence. Evan took the note and locked it in a drawer. He wanted to leave, sell the house, burn it, but Grace refused. "They'll follow," she said simply. "They always do." That night, Evan dreamed of the guest room. In his sleep, he crawled through the mirror frame and emerged in a room identical to theirs, but colder, darker, and filled with breathing. Hundreds of breaths, all around, none his own. When he woke, he was standing in the hallway, the guest room door wide open again, the hatch ajar, and his hammer gone. Would you crawl into a tunnel inside your own wall if it meant finally getting answers? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Part 6 is next, and it's going deeper. No. Evan stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the open hatch like it might blink back at him. The hammer was gone, but the nails he had sunk just hours before lay scattered on the floor, neatly lined up beside the opening as if someone, or something, had pulled them out one by one. He didn't want to look inside again. He didn't want to see what might be waiting in that unnatural space behind the wall, but part of him knew he had no choice, not anymore. Grace was slipping further from herself. Each day and the house, it no longer felt like theirs. It pulsed now, with every breath from the other side. It watched. It waited. He retrieved a flashlight and knelt beside the hatch, taking one deep breath before crawling in. The air turned instantly dry and hot, like an attic sealed for decades. The passage was tight, forcing him to slither more than crawl. The drywall scratched his arms and knees, and his flashlight beam shook with every movement. After about 15 feet, the space opened slightly into a vertical shaft, a narrow drop with a frayed rope ladder nailed into the side. Against all logic, he descended. At the bottom, he found a hidden room beneath the house. No blueprints had ever shown this. It was crude, built into the foundation itself, dirt floor, stone walls reinforced with aging timber, and along those walls, photos, dozens of them, all of Grace. From years ago, her as a teenager, her in her 20s, her walking through a grocery store, her sitting on the porch of a different house before Evan had even met her. Evan staggered back, bile rising. In the center of the room stood a chair. A single bare light bulb swayed above it, and next to the chair, a tape recorder. He pressed play. A young voice crackled through. "You told me to be quiet, but now you don't hear me at all. It's not fair. I was here first. She talked to me first." The voice trembled as if crying, then turned bitter. "He took her from me." Silence followed. Then another voice, older, deeper. "Not Lucas. We made a deal. You broke it." The tape clicked off. Evan stood there in the stillness, trying to make sense of the impossible. Someone had been down here, watching Grace, for years. But there was more. On the far wall was a wooden board, nailed over what looked like a narrow opening. Evan pulled it loose. Behind it was a second room, smaller, a nursery, a crib, a rocking chair, children's drawings pinned to the walls, and carved into the headboard of the crib, "For her return." His breath caught. Grace had miscarried, had always spoken about the feeling that someone had been waiting for the baby, watching. It wasn't just grief, she had whispered once. It was like someone else lost something too. Evan backed out of the room, heart pounding, and climbed back through the tunnel. He emerged into the guest room, drenched in sweat and covered in dust. But something was wrong. The hallway was darker than before, too quiet. "Grace?" he called. No answer. He stepped into the hall and saw the mirror, whole again, hanging on the wall like it had never been touched, and in its reflection, the guest room behind him was empty. He turned around. Grace was gone. If you found a hidden nursery under your house, would you leave immediately or keep? Digging for answers? Let us know in the comments before Part 7 drags us even deeper. Evan rushed from the guest room, heart pounding, every step echoing louder than it should have on the hardwood floor. "Grace!" he shouted again, stumbling through the hallway, then down the stairs. No answer. The house felt wrong now. Warmer, in some places colder in others, as if the architecture had shifted while he was in the tunnel. The living room lights were off. The front door still locked. Kitchen empty. The bathroom door stood ajar, mirror fogged, faucet dripping slowly, but no sign of her. Evan began tearing through every room, checking closets, under beds, even behind the shower curtain. Nothing. Just that oppressive silence. Then he noticed something new. On the hallway wall outside the guest room, tallies had begun to appear, fresh ones, carved into the paint with something sharp. 5 new marks, not from before. His breath caught in his throat. He ran back into the guest room. The mirror was still hanging, perfect, untouched, but now something moved within it. At first, it was just a flicker, then a figure. Grace, standing, motionless on the other side of the glass, as if trapped behind it, her expression blank, her eyes unfocused. Evan stepped closer. "Grace?" She blinked once, but didn't respond. Then a second figure stepped into view behind her, smaller, a boy, pale skin, dark hair, sunken eyes. He looked up at Evan and smiled faintly, then slowly raised a hand and placed it on Grace's shoulder. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. Evan slammed his fist against the mirror. "Let her go!" The mirror rippled, like water under glass. Then the boy's face changed, eyes turning solid black, mouth widening far too much, revealing a grin that wasn't human. The image vanished. Evan stared at his own reflection again, heart racing, panic mounting. He backed away, unsure of what to do, and noticed something on the floor. A Polaroid photo, still developing. He picked it up, hands trembling. It was a picture of the guest room, taken from the ceiling corner, just like the one on his phone before. In the center was Grace lying on the bed. Her eyes were open, and so were her lips, as if mid-scream. Evan turned the photo over, scribbled in the same jagged handwriting from the notebook, "You broke it, now she stays." He sank to the floor, the world spinning. The deal, the whisper on the tape. "You broke it." Lucas hadn't just been living in the walls. He had been part of something older, something that required silence, ritual, a balance. And Evan, by smashing the mirror, by opening the hatch, had disrupted it. He remembered the hidden nursery, the crib, for her return. What if this house wasn't haunted in the traditional sense? What if it was a vessel, something designed to preserve souls, echoes, until the balance was right again? And now it was broken. That night, Evan didn't sleep. He sat in the guest room waiting for the mirror to shift again. Around 2:47 a.m., it did. Grace reappeared, still frozen, still silent. He begged her to speak, to blink, to show any sign she was real. Then behind her, the boy returned, but this time he wasn't smiling. He placed his hand on Grace's shoulder again, and slowly she turned her head toward Evan. Her mouth moved, just 2 words. "Find Lucas." Then she vanished. If the person you love told you to find the ghost that took them, would you do it? Leave your answer in the comments before Part 8 pulls us into Lucas's world. Evan stared at the mirror long after Grace had vanished from it again, her final whispered command echoing inside his skull like a curse. Find Lucas. But how could he find someone who had either died in the walls of this house, or worse, had never left them at all? He returned to the basement, flashlight gripped like a weapon, crawling once more through the suffocating tunnel behind the hatch. This time, he brought the notebook with him, the one filled with Lucas's unhinged thoughts. He flipped through it again beneath the swaying light bulb of the hidden room. Amid the chaos of words and cryptic drawings, one line stood out, now more than ever. "There's another mirror under the stairs." Evan felt sick. That corner of the house had always been dark, cluttered, used for boxes and tools. He raced back up, heart racing, tearing through the stacked cartons until he found the wooden panel beneath the staircase. It wasn't nailed shut, just wedged tightly, like it hadn't been opened in years. Behind it was a crawl space, low-ceilinged and full of dust, and at the far end, another mirror. Smaller, round, cracked down the middle, but unmistakably glowing faintly in the dark. As Evan crawled toward it, the air grew colder, and the silence sharpened into a hum. He knelt in front of the mirror, unsure what to expect. His reflection returned his gaze, normal, still. Then Lucas appeared behind him, only in the glass. A boy with hollow cheeks, bloodshot eyes, and lips stitched shut with what looked like thread. Evan turned in real life. No one there. In the mirror, Lucas pointed downward, toward the dirt. Evan began to dig with his bare hands, scooping out soil until his fingers struck something hard. Wood. A box. He pried it free. Inside was an old cassette tape labeled Confession. He brought it back to the hidden room and played it on the same tape recorder as before. Lucas's voice emerged, hoarse, like it was recorded through pain. "I didn't mean to trap her," he rasped. "She was kind to me. She talked when no one else did. But he said she had to stay, said it was her turn. I broke the first deal, so I made another." A pause, then the older voice returned, the one Evan had heard before. Silence is safety. Secrets are currency. Echoes must balance. The tape ended. Evan sat there in shock. Lucas had tried to protect Grace. Failed. Tried again. Failed worse. He hadn't been the monster. He had been a prisoner too. A boy manipulated by something older. A force inside the walls. Behind the mirrors. Maybe the house itself. Evan took a deep breath and stood. Lucas, he said aloud, facing the cracked mirror again, I want to make a deal. The mirror pulsed. Once, then again. And then Lucas was back, in the glass, eyes wide with something like fear or warning. Evan reached toward the mirror, and for the first time, his fingers sank into it, cold, wet, like pushing through icy syrup. He pulled back. The reflection was gone. But the notebook now had fresh ink on a page that had been blank. 5 words. Under the house. She's waiting. Evan didn't hesitate. He returned to the tunnel, moved past the hidden room, and began exploring the far end of the dirt path behind the wall. After crawling 30 feet, the tunnel widened again into a circular chamber with concrete walls and a ceiling that curved, like the inside of a well. In the center, Grace stood motionless, her eyes closed, her feet barely touching the ground, floating. Surrounding her were mirrors, broken, mismatched, some ancient, others modern. All of them reflected her. None reflected Evan. A voice filled the chamber, not Lucas's, but something deeper, ancient. One leaves, one stays, one sees, one forgets. Evan stepped forward. Take me instead. Silence. Then laughter, quiet and dry, like wind moving through teeth. She already chose, the voice whispered, and Grace's eyes opened. If she's already chosen, what did she give up to protect him? Share your theories before we reach the final descent in part 9. Grace's eyes opened slowly, unnaturally, as if dragged from behind a veil, and the second they locked onto Evan's, he knew she wasn't entirely herself. Something looked out from behind them, her pupils dilated far too wide, her irises dulled like old glass, her mouth slightly parted but not breathing. The mirrors around her flickered, each one now reflecting a different moment in her life. As a child, laughing on a swing, as a teenager, crying in a hospital bed, as a woman, screaming during the miscarriage. Every memory Evan had tried to protect, her from now looping around her like a prison. Grace, he whispered, stepping forward, but her feet didn't touch the ground. She hovered slightly, toes inches above the dirt, suspended by whatever force held her in this forgotten underbelly of the house. One of the mirrors shattered without warning, then another. The voice returned, louder now, coming from everywhere and nowhere. This place is balance. It holds the pain. It echoes the choice. You want to take her place? Evan nodded once. Yes, let her go. The mirrors stopped flickering. The ground trembled. And from behind Grace, Lucas appeared, not as a child, but older now. Emaciated, face stretched thin by time and isolation. His lips were no longer stitched, but black scars remained. He looked at Evan with hollow regret and stepped aside. You'll forget her, Lucas whispered, voice brittle as paper. That's the cost. You stay. She leaves. You forget. Evan swallowed hard. Will she remember me? Lucas paused. Only the breathing. Only the mirror. The voice returned. Say it. Evan hesitated. Then, I offer myself for her release. The moment the words left his mouth, every mirror shattered in unison, the sound deafening, glass exploding inward instead of outward. The chamber darkened. Grace fell forward into Evan's arms, unconscious but warm, alive, real. He held her close, tears streaming down his face, but already he felt the shift. something crawling through his memories like termites in the walls of his mind. Names began to slip, then faces, then timelines. He carried Grace out of the tunnel, each footstep heavier, every breath harder. By the time he reached the guest room, dawn had broken. He collapsed on the floor, clutching her, staring at the shattered frame of the mirror. Grace stirred slowly, eyes blinking in the morning light. "Evan?" she whispered. He blinked at her, lips parted, but no recognition bloomed in his eyes. She sat up, cupping his face. "It's me, Grace." He looked at her with confusion, gentle but distant, like someone trying to remember a dream already gone. "You're okay," he said. "They let you out." She nodded, holding back tears. "And you stayed." Evan smiled faintly. "For her." She realized then he didn't know her. Not fully, not anymore. But he knew why he had done it. And maybe that was enough. She helped him to the couch, wrapped him in blankets, and watched him fall asleep. He didn't dream that night, but she did. In her dream, the mirror was whole again, and behind it, a new face was watching. Not Lucas, not Evan, something else. And it was still breathing. Would you trade every memory of the person you love just to save them? Let us know in the comments. The final chapter, part 10, is next. The days that followed passed like static, unfocused, flickering, distant. Evan wandered the house like a guest in someone else's home, polite but uncertain, a soft smile always on his face but never reaching his eyes. Grace stayed by his side, guiding him gently through the spaces they used to share. The kitchen where they used to cook, the porch where they used to watch the rain, the bedroom they once whispered into sleep. He never called her by name. Not once, but sometimes. In the early morning, he would wake before her and sit quietly at the edge of the bed, staring at his own reflection in the dark window. Grace noticed that he never entered the guest room again, not even once. She had sealed the tunnel behind the wall, bricked it shut, and hung a bookshelf over it. The mirror shards had been buried in the garden, salted and burned. Still, sometimes, the breathing returned. Faint, rhythmic only at night. She would lie in bed with her eyes open and count it. One inhale, one exhale. Not from Evan, not from herself. From somewhere deeper. But she never told him. What would be the point? He had given everything to free her. The price had already been paid. Weeks later, Grace received a package with no return address. Inside was an old, dusty VHS tape and a note that read, "Found this under the house. Figured it was yours." She stared at it for hours before finding an old player in the attic and connecting it to the TV. The screen flickered to life in black and white. The camera showed the guest room, decades ago. Younger wallpaper. No bed. A boy sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing in a notebook. Lucas. He stared directly into the lens. "They say if you listen too closely to the walls," he whispered, "you'll hear something that remembers your name." He smiled faintly. It remembered mine. The tape cut out. That night, Evan didn't come to bed. Grace found him, sitting in the hallway outside the guest room, staring at the sealed door. When she touched his shoulder, he looked up at her and asked, "Who's Lucas?" She didn't answer. She just held his hand and sat with him in the dark. The next day, a realtor passed by to ask if they were still thinking of selling. Grace said no. She couldn't leave, not now. Because deep down she knew something had stayed behind. Not Lucas, not Evan, not even the voice, something older, and it was still waiting in the mirror, in the breathing, in the space between the walls. And one day, someone else would hear it too. Thank you for listening to this story. If you've ever felt like you're not really alone in your own home, maybe you aren't, share your thoughts below, and never trust a room that feels too quiet.